Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining our inaugural Chorus Unplugged webinar, How to Review Calls in 10 Minutes and Leave Stellar Feedback. We've got a lot of incredible content here for you today. Our Senior Manager of Customer Success, Jordan Jeffrey, is going to walk you through all of our best practices. Just a few housekeeping notes before we get started here. Go ahead and place any questions that you have as they come up in the chat or in the Q&A, and we'll be sure to answer them either as they come up or at the end. Don't worry about taking notes. We will send you the recording of this webinar and the best practices deck as we wrap up here, though you may want to have Chorus open so that you can follow along. With that, take it away, Jordan.
Love it. Thank you for the intro, Sarah. So as Sarah mentioned, my name is Jordan. I manage the customer success team here at Chorus. How to review calls in 10 minutes and leave stellar feedback. Really what that gets down to is how to leverage Chorus's AI to hone in on those key coachable moments within conversations. That's going to be the focus for today. And as Sarah mentioned, it will be an interactive session, so there'll be a lot of time to follow along. So brief agenda for today. We're going to first cover just quickly how to find a call to review. So when you do have that 30-minute block on your calendar and you are going to be guiding your team on which calls to coach on, you can find those really easily. We're going to spend most of the time today actually going into a specific conversation, and again, leveraging Chorus's AI to highlight those key coachable moments as quickly as possible. And finally, we're going to end with, once you do have those coachable moments, how can you actually deliver that feedback to the rep personally, or to share that moment out with the rest of the team. Now, before we jump into the interactive session, wanted to spend a little bit of time just talking about why coaching matters. And I may be preaching to the choir a little bit here, but I think the number one thing that I hear in my conversations with other managers is, oh, I wish I had more time to coach. I just can't seem to make the time for it. It tends to not be a priority, or if it is a priority, it always falls off the plate at the end of the week. And I think it's really interesting because the other thing I also hear is, I also do know that it is important, right? And I think it's somewhat common knowledge that there is a real revenue impact into investing in coaching your team. For example, the Sales Management Association noted a 17% higher revenue growth for teams that did invest in sales coaching compared to ones that didn't. And I think this is especially relevant today when you're not in the office, right? Like you can't actually hear your rep struggling with some key objection handle or that tough competitive conversation just because you're walking by their desk. You actually have to dedicate that time to go in and actually review that calls to deliver that feedback. And so again, the goal of today is how to make that coachable time as efficient and effective as possible. And so we'll close out with some tips around that, but that's going to be the focus for today. So with all that being said, let's go ahead and jump into the interactive portion. And so I'm going to pull up Chorus right here. I'm going to pause for just a second for everybody to follow along. And once everybody here is logged in, you should be seeing a view very similar to what I'm seeing right here. So as a manager, you should be defaulted here to this view, which is the recordings page. And essentially all this page is doing is telling you all of your team's recordings listed here by order of most recent conversation. And this is where we're gonna spend a brief amount of time just looking through how to actually identify which call you should coach on, right? If you're coming in with absolutely no context. So quick tips here. You'll notice we have the account name because we will automatically be mapping your team's conversations to your CRM record. You can obviously see the subject line, but I think from a coaching perspective, one pro tip is to look for conversations that actually have multiple participants here in the calendar invite. And obviously from a coaching aspect, for a rep, it becomes much more of a challenge to manage a type of conversation that has those different roles and personas. So that's a quick way to try to identify which conversation to coach on. Another thing that I do want to call out that I think is probably underutilized is the Chorus filters here at the top. So we should be defaulting you to your specific team. But what I would advise you to play around with is the date range functionality. So you can filter down by calls that maybe just happened the last week. And I think more importantly, the deal stage, right? So if I click into this right here, I could filter down to just conversations that are happening in the early, like let's say your discovery stage, that tends to be a really common place that most managers do want to coach their teams on. Or again, like I could look at conversations that are happening later if it's near the end of the month of the quarter and you want to make sure that your team is handling those tough negotiations well. One other thing that I think is really useful here for the filters is that you can actually add additional filters beyond the default ones that you see here. So when I click into the add filters section here, I can actually break this down by the reps on my team. This becomes more useful, especially if you have new hires on your team and you want to just dig into their specific calls. The other thing that you could do is actually look for conversations that happened with deals that are a certain size, right? So if you wanted to get really granular here, right, with a few clicks, you could say, well, I only want to look for conversations that happen in my research or discovery stage by specific reps with deals over a certain size. So that's, I think there's just one quick way to do it. The final thing I'll say about this is you should notice that Chorus is also showing you on this page some of the key conversation highlights. And we're going to dig into this a lot more when we review the actual individual call. And your page, again, may look slightly different depending on what your admin has set up for you. But two common ones that are highlighted here are next steps and risks. And risk, for example, is identifying language that stands to reason could put a deal at risk. And so this page is actually interactive. And so if I click into this, it'll actually pull up this nice little window pane here. You can see the type of language we're looking for, confusion, problems, things like that. But the main takeaway I would say here in terms of choosing a call to review is that you can actually use these top of the columns right here to sort. And you can say like, hey, I've got my 30 minutes. I need to find some call to review. Maybe it's a good idea to look at ones where risks were identified, or in the flip side, maybe some conversations where next steps were not brought up and set by the rep in your team. So with all that being said, I personally think the best way to identify a call to coach on is actually have the rep tag you or share that call with you. They're going to know the best context more than anything else, but hopefully that helps in terms of just identifying a call to choose. And with that, let's go ahead and jump into the individual call itself. So I've got a call pulled up here. Again, we're going to keep this pretty interactive. So I'm going to pause for a second while you select your own call from your own system. Any call will do. I would recommend one that's 30 minutes or longer. Obviously, there's a lot more data in there. And what we're going to chat through first is just what Chorus is trying to highlight for you from this page. Again, so you can identify those key coachable moments and get through, in this case, a 40-minute meeting as quickly as possible. So first thing to call out here is one, just the 1.5 and 2x options. I know it sounds basic, but I've talked to folks who don't actually realize that the playback speed up exists. And even that itself, a 40-minute call at 2x speed will obviously help your efficiency quite a bit. And I don't even listen to calls at 1x anymore. So, I think start off with 1.5, 2x may take some getting used to, but heavily recommend that. The second thing that I would also urge you to dig into a lot more is this speaker separation. So you should see that when you're looking into conversations with Chorus. And so we know that the rough best practice for conversations that happen in discovery is between 40 to 60% prospect talk time within a given call. So in this particular example, this is actually right in that range, which is great. But one thing you'll note is that you'll see that speaker separation down here in the audio player as well. And I think this is really, really useful because this gives you the shape of the conversation. And especially for new hires or folks that are new to sales, what you'll find is you'll typically see less of this back and forth throughout the call. And you'll see something more like, well, they'll ask the discovery questions they know they're supposed to ask and just get the answers to. So less discovery, more qualification a lot of the time. And then you'll see long periods of demo, right? and quick like one sentence or closed questions, right? That don't get these type of engaged response from the prospect. So above anything else, by coming into a conversation, again, pretending you have no context, you can actually just skim through the conversation this way, and it's fully interactive, right? And quickly jump to those key moments of the call. And another best practice is to look at some times where your rep actually did ask a good question that did get a good engaged response from the prospect right here. So that workflow, I think, is really easy, and combining that with the playback option can get you really quickly to some of the key points of the call. Now we're going to pivot a little bit into how to quickly see what conversation topics actually came up. So there's a few different ways to do this. So the first one I want to call out here is just within this view, you're going to see that Chorus, again, is automatically identifying a few things that we view as key to the call. So you'll see next steps, engaging questions, prospect questions. You'd also see competitors here. So no competitors were identified in this particular call, but if there were, this is where they would be. And the really nice thing here is that if I take a look, let's just say next steps right here, I click on it, it'll automatically go down and it'll highlight those moments right here in the call transcript. And again, I can visually see where in the call that this took place. And so I can jump to those key moments right away. And I think especially from a coaching aspect, being able to jump into, let's just say, those competitive highlights is really, really impactful. And if there was something else that you were looking for specifically, like you came into the call and had a good understanding of something specific, let's say a new feature or product that you were launching, you could come in here and just use the search transcript functionality, and it'll pull up those moments directly within the transcript as well. So again, I can see visually where it's coming up. I can hit play right here to listen and get context to that moment. And so those are some of the key ways just directly within this view that you can jump and identify those key coaching moments. So before I move on, I wanted to pause and just see if there's any questions from the group.
We actually did have a question come in. It was what exactly quantifies as engaging with engaging questions and moments?
A great question. So for engaging questions, we look for a few things. One of which is we look to see whether the rep was asking the question, and was it an open-ended question, and did it get an engaged response from the prospect, right? And so we look for questions that got at least 30 seconds of response time and length. There's obviously some other factors that go into it, but that's kind of the basics right there. And again, we will highlight that directly right here in the follow-up section as well. And this is, again, less of a coaching moment, more of a way to identify what's working. And so this can be a helpful way to understand, what are those good questions your reps are asking, and quickly share those out with the rest of the team. Is there anything else, Sarah?
I don't think so. Thank you.
Perfect. All right. So we're going to move on now to one other section here before we talk about how to actually share some of this content and deliver feedback to the rep or to the rest of your team once you identify those coaching moments. And for that, we're actually going to go over here to the highlights section. And again, I think this section is underutilized because I think it's actually very, very impactful. So again, this will look slightly different for everybody here on the call, but if you click over to your highlights section, what you should see is that you'll see your competitors, your features, your playbook items, right? And these have all been customized for your particular course instance, right? And again, you have this exact same interaction right here, where if I click on one of these, it will show up down here within the transcript. And if you actually keep scrolling down here, you'll notice some additional sections such as follow-up, pricing and discounting, discovery, deal risk, and late stage. And these are all themes that Chorus looks for out of the box across all of our customers. So our AI is actually trained to identify these types of moments in sales success conversations. So if we were to look at deal risk, for example, like here's a moment Chorus identified where, okay, the prospect is saying, well, they're over budget. And so identify that as deal risk. And the way I view how this page should be used is really when, again, you're coming in, no context, and you just need to get a sense beyond just looking at the speaker separation, what was actually discussed in this conversation. By doing a quick scan of this page, you can get a sense of, well, okay, we talked about pricing for time, discounting came up. You should be able to very quickly identify some key points that you want to listen to and drill into directly from this page. Okay, and again, that interaction is pretty easy. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and move on now. So we've covered how do I actually identify some key coachable moments, right? So now the question is, now once you find one of those, what do you do with them? So there's two primary ways that you can do this within Chorus. The first of which is leaving a comment right here. And so what you'll notice if I click over to comments, you can see there's already one comment listed right here. Shows up nicely, nice little interactive wall there. When I click into my comment, the first thing that you should note is that the comment is timestamped to where you are listening to in the audio player, okay? And if I were to write in objection handle, let's just say that was the case, what would happen here, if I hit enter or hit add, this would actually email the rep that owns this call, my comment, as well as the timestamped link to that specific moment in the call, right? And so this is the point, you're not giving general feedback, it's very targeted to the specific moment where that particular coaching moment came up, right? And again, let's just say you have a few new hires on your team. I might want to mention somebody else and actually pull them into that conversation. Maybe you notice when reviewing somebody else's call that they experienced a similar issue. Here at Chorus, we'll use this as well to highlight moments to our product team. And again, by mentioning somebody, they will also get that exact same email to their inbox as well. And you will notice right here that by default, all comments start off as public, but if I want to, I can also leave private comments, which only means that the people that I have specifically mentioned will get that comment. So this can be more useful if you do have something that's more constructive that you don't want to show up here on this wall for whatever reason. Again, we promote like a very open, constructive coaching culture. So we primarily have all of our comments public, but again, the functionality is there if you'd want it. Want to head and pause before I go and jump into sharing. Sarah, was there anything else?
Yeah, we did have a question come in about trackers and how you would be able to identify those in calls and how you would add them.
Yeah, so let's go back to the highlight section here for that. So essentially what trackers are, for anybody that's unfamiliar, those are the customized keywords and phrases that have been set up for your specific course instance. So that's going to be your competitors, your features, your playbook, your value language, and obviously anything else that you view as important to track. And so your course admin can set those up and customize those, and you can edit those as much as you'd like, but you do have to be a course admin to do it. So if you're not an admin, just reach out to your admin, and it's a pretty easy process to set those up. All right, so let's go ahead now and jump into the share portion. So let's just say we had this great objection handle, and you know what, I'm reviewing it. Instead of leaving this personal feedback to the rep, I actually want to highlight this to the rest of my team. And the way to do that is at the top right here, I can hit the share icon. And what you'll notice is, again, we are timestamped to where we were listening to in the call. And we default to just going to the end of the conversation. But this, again, is interactive. So I could play around with this, right? I could set my start and end time. And the key thing I would identify here is that when you're sharing a moment, whether it's a win or a learning moment, it becomes really important to just select that snippet that's most impactful. So I wouldn't recommend anything longer than 2 minutes in most cases. This is the primary way that we share product feedback internally. Again, like great objection handles internally. So it just becomes much more impactful whenever you're sharing something with someone that may not be, let's just say, on the sales team, that they just get that really key high impact moment. So I've got my snippet selected here. I click finish cropping, and this will actually pull up this nice little window right here, which will give me a link that now I can add into an email. I can paste this directly into Slack. And I thought it'd be useful here. Just let me 1 second. I'm going to reshare my screen. Because one thing that I think is really key to understand as well is that even if you are not a Chorus user at your company, you can still actually share these moments out and they can still see them. So this is what it looks like to someone who is a non-logged in user to Chorus, right? So again, let's just say you just launched a new feature line or something along those lines, and you're sharing this with your VP of product or maybe to your executive team. They would still be able to get that knowledge. They'll see it's just that exact snippet, and they'll also see that same speaker separation as well. So I'm gonna pull back here into our main screen. All right. And that's really it. I wanted to keep today pretty targeted and focused. So just to recap, before we hop back and talk about some of the ways you can, some best practices rather on how to set up some of these coaching and feedback moments for your team. One, when you're trying to find a call that you want to choose to coach on, you can use the filters here at the top to really drill into the specific stage of the call. You can use the additional filters here to target specific reps in the team. And then again, you can use some of these conversation highlights specifically to sort and identify which call might be good to review. And then if we go back into our call here, the best things that I can recommend is one, heavily utilize the playback speed and the speaker separation to quickly jump to those key portions of the call. And then outside of that, when you're actually looking for those specific conversation topics, one course is going to highlight some of the key ones to you up here, your competitors, your engaging questions. You can use the search functionality to drill in and find anything specific. And again, you're coming in with literally no context. You're just coming to Chorus and trying to get a sense of what happened in this call. The highlights section is really, really impactful for that. And then once you have that coachable moment and you want to deliver that feedback, you can hop back to the comment section. And again, I recommend using this for more of the one-on-one feedback. And if there's something that you do want to share out to the rest of your team, whether it's a win or a tough objection handle, use the share functionality for that. So all that being said, let's pop back here before we wrap up. A few tips here that we've seen work really well with other managers. So one, set up a dedicated weekly block to do call review. And I definitely found this as one of the most helpful items for myself. When I didn't have a dedicated weekly block, it was always that thing that fell off at the end of the week. For me, what worked best was an hour-long block on Thursday or Friday afternoon, specifically wrote to my team that do not book over this time, and really respect that, that time block for yourself. And that's one of the best ways to make that cadence work for you. Number two, have your reps submit clips to you for review. We spent a little bit of time talking about how to actually identify which call you should pick. Obviously, your reps know when they struggle in conversations. So have them, mention you in one of those calls, right? They can tag you in a comment where they struggled. And additionally, I also found this pretty impactful as well. If there's something specific that is important to your team right now that's top of mind, again, maybe it's a new pricing model, maybe it's a new feature or a competitive conversation, have them send you that clip so you don't have to review the entirety of the call, right? You can get through a lot more conversations if you're just have to review 5 minutes of one compared to an entire 30 minutes. And finally, this I think is probably the biggest impact you could have for setting up a coaching structure or this type of learning mindset for your team is setting a dedicated Slack channel to do call review and coaching. And so at Chorus, we have our film review Slack channel. That's what we call it. Obviously, you can call it whatever you like, but it's a dedicated place where both managers and reps can leave calls for feedback. And we have reps on our team, which will be trying out new talk tracks, struggling through them a little bit because they're new, but they'll post it out to the rest of the group, and it's open to anyone to deliver and leave feedback in there. And so that's, I think, been one of the best things that we've done to help promote this type of interactive, again, like learning culture. And I think it's been even more impactful now that, again, we aren't sitting in the office next to each other and able to hear each other on those calls. So this is how we're still able to kind of promote that type of learning and feedback culture. So with that, I'll leave it for Q&A, if there was anything else.
Yeah, absolutely. We did have a few questions come in, and I know that we're really close to time. So this one was, what's the best way for my reps to self-coach?
It's a great question, complex question. So best way to get reps to self-coach. I think one tip, I'll start off with talking about how I would do it if I were a new rep. So as a manager, I think it's the best thing to do is actually give your reps some guidance, right? Some direction on the types of conversations that you think they need to work on. And a quick hack to doing this, and something that we do during onboarding at Chorus, is we filter down by conversations where the deal stage at the time of the call was, let's say, discovery, and the deal stage now is closed won or closed lost. And I think especially when you're learning, I think looking at what good looks like is probably the most impactful. So filtering down by that, that discovery call, but the deal stage is now won, that's probably a good discovery call. And then have them filter down by some of the top reps on the team, the reps that actually have been there for a while, know the product, know your market, and literally just have them review some of those conversations and have them write up a little bit about the things that they actually learned in that call. And beyond that, I would say, doing a peer review can also be really, really impactful. So just assigning a few reps on your team to, review each other's conversation, and then you as the manager can obviously review their feedback and give additional feedback. But I think just starting off that motion is probably the key thing for reps.
Wonderful. I think we have time for one more. So this one came in, it was about the speaker separation. So how does Chorus know which speaker is which? Yeah,
so let's go back here to our call right here. So the way that Chorus works is when a rep comes into Chorus, we will actually learn what's called their voice fingerprint. It is something that each rep can manually create, but will also get automatically created the more conversations that they have. So we are literally listening for your rep's voice in the call, and we're able to differentiate that versus the prospects as well. And so over time, it gets better and better as it learns your rep's voice. The other thing that I think is really important to note there is that, if you're in a situation where there's a ton of background noise, or for whatever reason, there's like audio connection issue, things like that, those are all going to affect how well Chorus can identify your rep's voice versus somebody else's as well. So, all those things come into play, but at the end of the day, we actually have AI that will literally learn your rep's voice and is able to identify that versus the prospects. Anything else?
I think that wraps us up as far as everything that we have time for today.
Perfect. Well, everyone, it was great taking the time to walk you through this. If you have any questions afterwards, each of your accounts should actually have a Chorus CSM as well, so don't hesitate to reach out to them. Yeah, Sarah, anything else?
That's it. Thank you guys so much for joining, and stay tuned for the recording and the best practices deck and for the next in the Chorus Unplugged series. Thanks for joining.